I'm going to now formally, so now I'm going to welcome everyone again. So welcome everyone. I want to take the opportunity to introduce Dr. Chris Baldwin, who's the Executive Director of the Student Success Center for Student Success in Lansing, Michigan. Chris is here to visit the college and really to learn more about who we are and how we operate. He's kind of on a Michigan State tour of community colleges, both to help us better understand what he does and for us really to understand what he and his center does. In preparation for this, Chris and I had a couple of conversations, and of mutual interest to us is the shifting mental model of higher education. And in saying that, I'm very much interested, both at a very personal level as well as a professional level, the role that faculty play in that. And I'm not saying the academic role faculty play in that. I'm talking about the role faculty can play in policy, in shaping some of the processes that are both from a state level, local level, and also a national level. So I'm going to give Chris an opportunity to talk a little bit more about himself and then get you guys going. So thanks for being here as well. Chris Baldwin. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today, and thanks for being here. I'm hoping you're here for more than just lunch, but if you're here for lunch, that's okay too. My name is Chris Baldwin. As Ken said, I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Center for Student Success. I want to talk a little bit about how that center came to be in a minute, but my background, I've been working in community colleges for a little over a decade. I used to work for a college in Ohio. I've studied community colleges in my doctoral work at the University of Michigan. I worked for Jobs for the Future, which is a sort of a national intermediary group that focuses on improving educational and workforce outcomes, based in Boston. And then a couple of years ago, this center was created, and I was languishing, and Ken and I were just trading war stories about finishing our doctorate. I was languishing and not finishing my doctorate because I was busy doing some of the national work around the completion agenda. And I decided to come back to Michigan to really focus on my doctorate and also spend time working more closely with institutions again. And so that's a little bit about who I am and where I come from. I'm very passionate about the community college mission. I think they're critically important institutions. And as Ken said, I think we're at a very important point as a set of practitioners and institutions around where are we going and what is our mission going to be moving forward. And so in that context, let me talk a little bit about the Michigan Center for Student Success. It was formed in early 2011 with a grant from the Kresge Foundation, roughly $1 million grant over 3 years. And I've given you several documents. I'm going to refer to them periodically, but I'm not going to go through them in great detail. The first document is one that sort of outlines our mindset and how we operate, what our vision is, what our goals are, and that'll give you a little deeper sense than I'll probably go into. The second document is a bit of a matrix. It looks like this. And it is the litany of various sort of state-level student success-oriented activities that are going on. There's certainly a lot more going on at individual institutions, but these tend to be cross-institutional activities that are happening. And then the third sheet is while it's the shortest one, it may be the one that I spend the most time talking about because it really gets to Ken's point about a shifting mindset and where we're going as a set of institutions. But first, the center was, as I said, was created about 3 years ago. And it really emerged out of this national pressure around improving student outcomes. Not just for community colleges, but as I don't have to tell you all that our graduation rates suffer vis-a-vis our four-year peers. And in both sectors, I don't think the completion rates are where folks would generally want them to be. And so there's just been, you feel this probably more than I do, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's just been this preponderance of focus on improving completion rates, graduation rates, and degree attainment. And so in Michigan, that sort of manifested itself in a variety of initiatives, probably most prominently Achieving the Dream. At the high point, there were 17 Michigan colleges participating in that initiative. And while I think that's an important initiative, I don't think it is. It was certainly one of the early initiatives focused on community college student success. There's been a lot of things that have happened since then, many of which Gogebic is involved in one way or another, that I think are equally and if not more important than Achieving the Dream. But what was happening was these pockets of things going on all over the place. And it's not unique to Michigan. It was happening in a lot of places, but I think it was exacerbated here because we are such a decentralized state and we operate as individual institutions with a lot of autonomy. There were a lot of very good things going on that nobody else knew about. And so the Kresge Foundation really was interested in trying to create a mechanism in Michigan most states have a state agency, a state coordinating board or system office that coordinates institutions on some level, but we didn't have that. And so there was a sense that, we really need to leverage the good things that are happening at the institutions. And so the center was created, as the first page of the one document says, to really serve as a hub between the institutions and serve as a convener. We spend an awful lot of time. Some of you have participated in various events of the center. We have a large Student Success Summit every year. We have about 400 people from across the state that come together for 2 days. We have a number of sort of quarterly meetings on various topics that we tend to talk about, to have discussions. The past year we've had quarterly meetings on assessment and placement. We had a discussion about student mobility between and among post-secondary institutions, and then we also had a session about what's the right math at the right time as it relates to students coming into our institutions and going to others. So those are kind of the convenings that we organize. We have other ones, of course. I'm going to come back to faculty discussion in a second. We also have goals around really trying to collectively use data to better understand what's happening to our students. That's been one of the mantras in the reform initiative among community colleges, is that quite frankly we just don't know enough about what's happening to students, where they are succeeding or where they're falling out of the system. And so we are definitely in the mode of trying to help institutions use data more effectively to understand their student populations. Very much related to that, we also have embarked on a variety of research projects to really understand in an aggregate way across the state what's happening to our students. Like many of you deal with transfer and articulation issues locally with institutions. We have no idea really where our students are going collectively. If you look at some recent reports from the National Student Clearinghouse, it suggests that in higher education and post-secondary education nationally, the most common destination for a student, public two-year institution. I would not have thought that if I hadn't seen that data. We don't know those things in Michigan, so one of the research projects that we've launched and we're raising money to do is to do the similar kind of analysis here in Michigan, so we really understand what's happening to our students as they move between and among institutions. The last of our 4 goals that I've been talking about is really focused on how can we leverage public policy to support what you're trying to do at the institutional level to improve student outcomes. Michigan being decentralized, we don't start there, but policy can serve a very valuable role in a conversation about shifting a mental mindset. And it can, if we're not careful, it can play a detrimental role, but if we're thoughtful about it, policy can serve a very valuable role. And so that's kind of the overarching frame of what we do at the center. It's convenings, it's research and data, and we have an awful lot of conversations about what legislators and the governor and other people in Lansing are trying to do for us or to us, depending on your perspective on any given day. We are, one of the reasons, and Ken mentioned, I'm going out around the state right now to talk with institutions. We've been at this for a little while, and I recognize some faces in the room, but a lot of your faces are new to me, quite frankly, and we want to remedy that on some level. We're trying to gauge from an institutional perspective those things that folks have engaged in, what's been useful, what's not. We're going to be transitioning to in fundraising for the future work of this center, and we really want to know what's value add to institutions. So that's part of why we're going out to campuses. I spent time talking with the senior staff here. I'm going to meet with the board later today, and so we're doing that across the state. So that's really kind of why I'm out. But I was really anxious to talk with you as faculty members because we came in to this discussion with a very pointed emphasis on faculty engagement. This won't come as a shock to any of you, but if you're not engaged in the conversation about student success, then it's probably not going to happen. And so I think shockingly, several national reports of folks that have been thinking about very hard and smart ways about student outcomes over the last 10 years have realized the same thing. Faculty are the key to all of this, and how do we support them in their efforts to help students succeed. And so we've done a few things to try and organize and create an infrastructure for faculty dialogue, but that work is nowhere near done, and we want to grow it. Jenny Shanker is my colleague and the associate director of the center. She was a faculty member at Lake Michigan College and then the dean of transitional studies. I brought her in primarily to focus on how do we figure out the best way to engage faculty that are very busy, carrying heavy course loads, don't have time to get away from campuses, but how do we engage faculty in a way that's robust, meaningful, and sustained. And so we've done a few things. Every spring, we typically have regional conversations with faculty. We've done it for the last 2 years. Last spring was, the first spring we did it was really just, we were kind of probing, like what's on your mind, what do you care about, and had some interesting discussions. We try to do these around the state so that folks can get to them. Last year we did the regional conversations were really focused on reading apprenticeship, because that was one of the things that came out of the early discussion, is that we really need to focus on reading and reading apprenticeship. And so that's been the focus of those regional conversations. In 2012, yes, June of 2012, we had a 2-day faculty retreat at Escanaba. I don't remember if anybody here was there or not, but and that was a discussion really about, a very pointed discussion about trying to develop a faculty perspective about students' success from the statewide, and really have a dialogue about what that meant from the perspective of faculty. And so those are some of the specific faculty convenings that we've had. I was telling Ken and others at a meeting this morning, one of the things that I've been encouraged by is the level of engagement of faculty, but we certainly want more. But one of the things that I've been very happy about is when I first started, we do the Student Success Summit, and it's, like I said, it's about 400 people. The first year, we had 30 faculty, maybe, something like that. The second year, we had about 100 and 110, somewhere in that ballpark. And then again, this past September, just a month ago, we had about that number of faculty. And so we've been purposely encouraging faculty engagement and involvement in things. And so I've been really encouraged to see that. Again, not done, more needs to happen. The other things that I want to sort of highlight as it relates to faculty specifically that we've been doing, and then I want to talk a bit about where we sort of see things going and get your take on it, is Ken mentioned the role of faculty in policy, and I think that's policy, a big P, sort of state policy making with the people that cause trouble in Lansing and Washington, but also little p, what's happening at an institutional level to set and examine policy as it relates to student progression and success. On the big P, we have been very encouraged on a variety of fronts. There's been significant discussions statewide about revisiting our transfer agreement, the Michigan transfer agreement, and taking a look at the macro agreement that has been in place for about 40 years without really being altered. We've just in the last year had a significant discussion about transitioning to the Michigan transfer agreement, which is similar but a more refined and focused agreement that will hopefully lead to much clearer destinations for students that are intending on transfer. We've had a good amount of faculty engagement in that, and I think it's critical because we can't develop these agreements in isolation. We were very pointed about having academic voices on the committee that was working on this. It would be easy for us to really focus on registrars and advisors, but we wanted to make sure that we had the full perspective on this, and we had strong academic voices on the committee. Similarly, we've had and will continue to have discussions about college readiness. There was a conversation last spring and winter, I guess, about what are some reasonable benchmarks for us coming out of high schools using the ACT, and how are institutions using those benchmarks to gauge readiness when students come to you? What does that mean vis-a-vis your placement scores? I think that was an important first step in the conversation. Statewide, there was developed some benchmarks that were recommended. I don't think all the institutions adopted them. But the idea is that we need to be clearer about our expectations for students coming out of high school if we want to improve issues related to developmental ed. But that conversation's not done. The Common Core, our legislature finally decided we are going to be a Common Core state. We are adopting the Common Core standards. The questions of how we assess that over time are still being debated. But all of these issues, whether it's transfer, college readiness, Ken mentioned dual enrollment, if faculty are not engaged in those conversations, those policy interventions will fail. They just won't be designed in the way that's meaningful and the right way to get things done. And so if there's a theme through all of my comments, is please engage, because it's important. Let me talk for a few minutes about the things that I think are happening that really need to make us shift our thinking collectively. And I'll start with the notion of the completion agenda writ large. We're no longer, as much as we might want to focus on access and enrollment, that is no longer the measure of success for us as a set of institutions. It is now access and completion, or access and success, however it's defined. And that's contested ground, and it will be because of our varied missions. But there is no question that policymakers, less so in Michigan, but elsewhere, they're getting very rigid about outcomes of students and what's happening to students. Are they getting the credentials that they came for, if in fact they came for one? So that is probably the overarching mental mind, the shift in mental thinking that I think we need to be thinking about. I mentioned transfer and college readiness. One of the things that's really emerging, this is why faculty voices are so critical. On both of those issues, it comes down to what do we think about general education, and what do we want our students to have from the general education that they get at your institution. There are a variety of national initiatives trying to think about competencies and student learning outcomes that relate to those competencies. There's the degree qualifications profile from the Lumina Foundation that the Lumina Foundation developed. There's the LEAP program, which is, I always mess up the acronym, so I gotta look. It's the Liberal Education and America's Promise Initiative, which is more focused on universities. But in both cases, it is about trying to take the general education core and apply it in language that the general population can understand, and that at some point we can articulate and measure student learning outcomes. So I think that is a huge, challenging shift. Cannot be done without faculty. Just cannot be done. Another big discussion point I think we're really shifting is what are the value of the credentials? We definitely want people to have more credentials, but it's not just any credentials. We want them to be valuable in the labor market. And again, I think that ties back to this discussion about learning outcomes and how do we articulate the value of the credential that they came here for. Some would like to simply use labor market data, just say, oh, okay, well, Bob got his degree in X, and 6 months after he got it, he's employed in the field in which he studied, and he saw a 20% increase in his income. Is that the value? I think that's maybe part of it. But policymakers want to sort of overly simplistically look at those numbers. And so I think, again, faculty voices and the broader value of credentials is critical. Finally, the last thing I want to mention, and I want to stop and see what questions you have or thoughts you have about anything I've said. The national pressure around completion has led to a variety of discussions, and I want to highlight that one-pager document that talks about a set of principles that were developed by several national organizations. And it refers to the core principles for transforming remediation, but I guess I would submit to you that title is a bit of a misnomer, because it's actually, these principles are about a lot more than just developmental education. Oh, thank you. A lot of sort of reform efforts nationally, a lot of organizations and funders saying similar but different things. And this document, the core principles for transforming remediation, was really an attempt to pressure some of the key organizations to get on the same page about what are the key things that we think need to happen. I share this with you, and we're using this not because we endorse everything that's in here or we think every institution needs to do absolutely these 7 things or you're a failure. That's not at all what we're suggesting. What I think is embedded here are some key things that we really have to think long and hard about as we get students in and through our institutions. Developmental education is a critical part of what we do as institutions. There is increasing evidence that the way we deliver it in a semester-based sequenced approach is an obstacle for students. There's no way to get around the fact that we have students who are actually succeeding in individual courses, but not completing the sequence. So that suggests that nothing wrong with what's happening within the classroom. It may in fact be the actual way we're delivering the courses in terms of the actual sequence of those courses, the time it takes to get there, and people are just not completing. For instance, if you are a minority or an underrepresented student that is maybe 3 levels down in developmental math, you have less than a 10% chance of ever getting to a college level course, let alone completing it. We know these things. We know these about our students, and so we have to take a hard look at how we do these, how we deliver developmental education. It doesn't mean we can just magically wave a wand and academic deficiencies vanish. That's not what I'm suggesting. These principles start to get at ways about how do we accelerate what we're doing so that we can help students be successful. Right here at Gogebic, the Accelerated Learning Program is a prime example. It is a national model for ways that we can think about doing developmental education different, still provide the basic skills that the students need, but get them where they need to go faster and hopefully more successful. So developmental redesign is a big, big issue. And I think we collectively have to be thoughtful about how we get there. Our center is really, we don't have all the answers, but we can help bring folks together, smart folks like yourselves, to try and find those answers and figure out ways to do that. The other big thing, and I'm not going to go through all those principles on that page, but the other big concept that I think comes out of these principles is we have to be much more prescriptive for our students. You know, we have said for as long as there's been community colleges, our mantra has been, come to us, we'll take you where you are, try to get you where you want to go. And we'll say, you know what, we got 150 programs, this is great, you look at this menu of options you have. Guess what? Students that have no schema for what it takes to go through college don't know what to do with all that choice. And they're failing because of it, in part because of it. And so the research is also suggesting, in addition to thinking about the sequences of dev ed, we need to think about how do we get students more quickly and clearly into programs of study. Rather than have them explore their options, that doesn't mean that they can never change their minds. And so we have to be thoughtful about on-ramps and off-ramps to different programs. It just means we need to be more prescriptive with students. For, you know, if you're right out of high school, if you weren't a great student and you're right out of high school, you know, you spent 12, 13 years in school basically being told to do what you needed to do at every minute of the day. Then, miraculously, over 3 months after your senior year, we say, oh, you figured it all out, go figure it out. And shockingly, our retention rates are 50% going from first term to second term for new students, particularly those that are underrepresented. So I want to stop there and just say that I think the two really, big things that are emerging, not just because foundations want them to emerge, but they're emerging from evidence that we all agreed we need. And then saying we have to rethink dev ed, but also provide basic skills. And we have to get students in moving more quickly and deliberately in programs of study. Whether those are the silver bullets, they're probably not. There's a lot of other things, student intent, student preparation, student's background, know-how, all of those things feed in. But as institutions, there are things that we can do. And so our center is really designed to try and help facilitate those conversations. So let me stop there. I talked longer than I probably should. So any questions, please?
Yeah, I have two. First of all, you were talking a little bit about right math at the right time.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that connects with principle 2 about the content of the gateway courses should align with the student's academic program of study, particularly in math.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about
Sure.
what institutions are doing for right math at the right time?
So it's been kind of interesting. We've, math is an obstacle for many, many students, both those that are ready and not ready for college. And so, no offense to any math faculty, it's a challenge for those of us that are mathematically, that numbers are not our friends. We've tried, since we started, to think about how do we get into this dialogue, because my role is not to dictate curriculum. I mean, that's not what we do. We're just trying to help facilitate conversations about where you all think the curriculum should be. And we've had fits and starts about it. And there's lots of delivery models out there about how to do it, my math labs. And there's all kinds of things that we can do to try and get students to experience math differently. But we were having a hard time getting any traction. And then we had this discussion about the Michigan Transfer Agreement. And I'm looking at Jean because she knows this from dealing with it every day. The macro agreement, one of the big problems with it was that there were provisos or exceptions to the agreement that was in place, which basically means we didn't have an agreement. I mean, we had 15 different ways of interpreting what universities wanted. One of the consistent things across those exceptions was math. And the main reason for that is universities want students at college algebra, and we primarily are at intermediate algebra. That's our gen ed math for the most part across most institutions. There's some variability in that. Well, it's the same problem we have with K-12. I mean, we were starting a conversation here, and they were not getting the students there. And so, not surprisingly, we had that disconnect. And so as we got into the Michigan Transfer Agreement discussion, there's no easy answer to solve that gap. And so what we started to talk about, and we actually looked at the Arizona model for their core transferability of courses, the first 30 credits. And they have 3 tracks, which are basically all the same except for math. There's a track that's basically liberal arts math or everyday math. There's a track with statistics, and there's a track with college algebra. And that's essentially where we are with our discussion about math here. The Michigan Transfer Agreement acknowledges the need for math pathways. So it kind of reinforces that larger structural pathways conversation I was pointing to earlier. So when we say the right math at the right time, if you're on your way to transfer from here to Northern Michigan and you're going to be a history major, why would we set up an obstacle for you to have college algebra? That just doesn't make any sense. The challenge, of course, is defining those pathways, and we're in the midst of that. There is a group of faculty that has been being pulled together to really try to articulate what do we mean by liberal arts math, what do we mean by statistics, and college algebra, I think is probably the easiest one. And so the goal is to have those things articulated. We'll solicit input from faculty across the state. We're going to try and have that finalized by the first part of the year. The Michigan Transfer Agreement will go into effect next fall. And that was legislatively pushed, so it might not be the optimal time frame, but that's what it is. So you said you had a second question?
Yeah, I had a second one. It has to do with moving students more clearly into programs.
Mm-hmm.
So here, I don't know that many of our students really get career counseling. I mean, we have a counselor, right, who does some career work, but how are institutions addressing that? I mean, because I'm thinking about when I'm sitting in my office advising a student, that isn't enough information.
Right.
Oh, I like English. Okay, be an English major. Like that doesn't really cut it.
Right. It's a combination of things, and there's no one thing. As with all of this, it's
Right.
complicated. So let me take a step back and talk about where I think this pressure is sort of coming from and the evidence that's supporting it. The Gates Foundation, getting increasingly to be a bad couple of words and depending on where you're talking, they funded an initiative called Completion by Design. And they are working in 3 states, Texas, Ohio, and North Carolina. No, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. And they have a subset of the colleges in each of those states that are essentially looking soup to nuts how to redesign essentially their institutions for completion, as the name implies. And one of the things that they're doing is looking at what is a fairly simplistic sort of model of student progression from the time that they connect on through and progress. There's a model for engaging students. And across that, early in the model, is pretty rigorous discussions about what their intent is and getting a much better idea about it. And then the institutions, I haven't worked with these institutions closely, but I know several of the organizations that are involved in this work nationally. We've had some of them participate in some of our convenings, and we'd like to get some semblance of a pilot along these lines going in Michigan with interested institutions, but we're not quite there yet. But what they're really doing is sort of funneling them into meta majors, or in other words, sort of broad sets of majors to get you going in a general direction. Instead of having this mass of students that are broadly undecided, if you have a propensity towards health programming, well, let's get you in that direction. And then the other part of it is, and this is where you all come in, is how can you be much clearer about the sequencing, the timing, the availability, the scheduling of courses. The Macomb Community College just did a really pretty significant redesign of some of their catalog, for lack of a better term. They really sort of redesigned the way that they're presenting the programs that are there to try and make it all much clearer to students. And they're trying to funnel them into these broad meta majors. There's a lot more to it, but that, in a nutshell, is it. Other questions or comments? Yep.
Chris, does your group work with Michigan legislators? You know, the feeder program are high schools.
Mm-hmm.
If there are lack of skill and development,
Yep.
the high schools aren't doing their work, and student families, you know, we have problems.
Yep.
We're funding, I'm on the Wakefield Manesco School Board, we're funding at 2005 levels. When I left there, we were getting $7,400 per child, now we're getting $7,000. That was 2005. 3 miles away, Hurley, Wisconsin gets $9,300 per child. They get 33% more funding. If my school got that funding, we'd have $650,000 of extra revenue this year to run better math programs. And I know you're junior colleges, but does your group talk to the legislative branch and say, you're not funding K-12?
Yes. So there's a lot in that question. Let me say this. So
I did it
the
without-
center that I run is housed in the Michigan Community College.
Chris, I never said the word Republicans.
No. It's all good, because we've been defunding education. It's a bipartisan effort, particularly in Michigan. I mean, there's some legitimate reasons, meaning there isn't money. I mean, that's part of the challenge. But the thing that I would say is a couple of things. One, the center sits in the Michigan Community College Association. So that association broadly's role is to advocate on behalf of community colleges to the legislature. One of the things that we have said is, you know, we have obviously pointed out the deficiencies of students coming out of K-12. And what's interesting, in the last few years, the legislature and the governor have actually put part of our funding in the school aid fund, which has historically only been K-12. I think the intent was to really get us talking more and to promote collaboration, but when you slice a pie, smaller pieces, it just creates fighting. And so we were not proponents of that. You know, we could boil all of this down to funding, and there's clearly not enough. And I know,
Or the will to fund it.
well, yeah. I mean, and the challenge that's happening at the same time that we're defunding is that we're raising expectations
Yeah.
on all sectors. The universities, I heard a statistic, and it's not right, but it's in the ballpark. They've been hit more so than the community colleges have, and they've lost like 20-25% of their funding over the last 10 years. I mean, you know, how do you get more students through? I don't know. And our answer is to raise tuition, which is why we're having the other issue. But I guess the thing that I would say about the relationships to K-12, and we had a discussion this morning about a recent hearing on developmental education that was called by our appropriations committee and the university's appropriations committee, and they wanted to know what's the cost of developmental education. So for the community college sector, we can roughly quantify that. We spend somewhere in the ballpark of $40 million annually on developmental education, the courses and the seat time. The legislators were not asking us so much to beat up on us. They're asking because they want to bludgeon K-12. And I actually testified, and part of my response was, yeah, we've got to improve students' preparation coming out of high school. There's no question we have issues there. But don't be so myopic in thinking that that's the solution to the problem. We have, community colleges statewide have roughly 50% of their students are over 25. So if we're going to talk about developmental education, then let's have a discussion about who's in those classes. If half of them are 25 or older, I guarantee you, if somebody made me take an algebra test today, I would be in remediation, because why? I haven't used it for 25 years. And so I think we have to resist the blame game. Universities do it to us, we do it to K-12. I mean, it rolls downhill, and there's no question that money's a problem, but in an environment of constrained resources, I don't think we're going to see market increases. Unfortunately, I agree with you. I think we need to invest in education, but I just don't see it, the trend. We may see marginal increases here and there, but not the kind of bump that you're talking about that would solve the disparity between what you're seeing across the board. So, long answer. So.
Well, I mean, and then the other side of that too is, I mean, we're probably not going to get any more money, but we have to be more strategic. And I think, having worked now in higher education for 10 years myself, that we haven't always been strategic or looking at data when we make decisions about how we provide our programs, and think, you know, is this a successful solution? Is this something that will work for a lot of students or just a little handful of students? And so spending our money better to get better results, I think, is the challenge that we basically have to take on, or else we're not going to improve.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Michigan has, for community colleges and universities, has performance outcomes-based funding now, and has for the last couple of years. But it's modest. I mean, compared to what's going on in other states. Ohio, to the south, is adopting a performance funding model statewide. 100% of their funding will be based on outcomes, not enrollment.
Is that related to Gates money, or is that?
No, this is state funding. The appropriations for higher education, which I'm from Ohio originally, which forever has been distributed based on an enrollment funding model, is going to shift. I think they're 50% this year, and next year they go to 100%. I think that's drastic, because I think what you do in that environment is you lop off the people less likely to get where you want them to go. And so we just undermine our entire access mission. Is there something to some kind of a hybrid that makes us look in different ways at the way we've helped students get through? Maybe. There are models, there are other states where there's a more balanced approach, I guess is probably the way I'd say. You had a question back here?
Yeah, it's, I just started up a new 10-portion technician program, and that multi-hydra of different math potentials is very intriguing, because again, I have non-traditional students, and I have students,
Right.
some may at some future time want to go into a 4-year college that would need higher math, but most of them are just going to go out and mark timber, and statistics level math would be marvelous for them.
Yep.
I'd be very interested in hearing more about what's in those different tracks, and how that's going to end up being, because that's really important to what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So the Michigan transfer agreement that I talked about, those are, and I apologize, I actually meant to bring copies of that and I didn't. But I can get it to Ken and we can circulate it. But if you looked at that agreement, there's a chunk of courses that are basically required. There's an English comp and either a second English comp or a communications. There's math. There's 2 sciences, 2 social sciences, and then 2 fine art, 2 fine arts. And that agreement is largely saying these are the core courses that we want you to have. We're not saying what Gogebic needs to define as those courses. That's still and should be always up to you. How do you make sure that your students and the courses that you provide and the content of the courses in those satisfy this broad agreement about transfer? So it will be up to you to make sure that the right content is in those courses and that it articulates with your transfer destination institutions. I mean, the transfer agreement is really focused on, if you have students that are in occupational terminal degrees, that's not what the transfer agreement is about. It is about those students that intend to move on to universities. But I think the principle, though, of math pathways, let's not set up a barrier where we don't need it and the student doesn't need it. So I encourage your engagement in those conversations. What this faculty group that's going to meet, I don't know if this first meeting is set yet. It's coming very soon, but they're going to basically articulate, what's the right word? they're not going to articulate what the curriculum in every one of those tracks needs to be. They're going to outline broadly what we think constitutes statistics, what we think constitutes liberal arts, but it will still be up to the institutions to design and create their courses to meet those, if that makes sense. So, okay. Other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, the opportunity to talk to you. And I think Ken had said I'm happy to, I'll be around for a while, so I'm happy to talk to anybody else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, very much. If anyone wants to stay around and, we're here for the afternoon to have a follow-up conversation, or if anything in particular interested you beyond what he spoke at, we're here. And there's more food. Take some food with you as well. Thank you, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, and thanks for being